Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today to share, explain the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And got an awesome show in store for you today. And we're going to talk about, often in apologetics, the best thing you could do is put yourself in the shoes of your opponents and try to look at things from their perspective, because so many times arguments, for the existence of God or the truth of Christ as Messiah and Son of God or the Catholic Church, it seems very strong to us, very persuasive to us, because we have a lot of presuppositions that we bring to the table. But what about the non-believer? How would they look at resources? In fact, so today's program, we're going to actually do that. And to help us accomplish this task, we have our good friend, Pat Flynn from Chronicles of Faith and the Pat Flynn Show, who, as you know, was a former atheist, then a studied atheist at that, who basically studied his way into belief that God exists and ultimately into the Catholic Church. And so he's going to come on the show on the other side of the break, and we're going to talk with this former atheist, and he's going to critique books that are out there that are designed to help people learn to believe in the existence of God. So that's going to be kind of cool. So we're going to actually have a former atheist critiquing theistic books on this show. I can't wait to hear what Pat has to say, because like I said, this is a blind spot for anyone who defends the faith, even if you're a theist or an atheist. We all have our blind spots. We all have our presuppositions. And sometimes we feel like certain arguments are how can anybody not accept this very clear, persuasive argument? But that's because we have our own presuppositions that aren't shared with our friends. So anyway, he's going to come up on the other side of the break. Also, as always, we do a critical thinking skills exercise. And with our Finding the Fallacy, and since it's Friday, we kind of changed things up here in the dojo just to, make things fresh and new. We're going to talk about propaganda technique instead. And today's propaganda technique is what I call defining opposition out of existence. And also, we made an early church father, which is really cool because, like I said, if you're a regular listener to the program, you will learn an awful lot about the early church and all the different fathers in the church, because this is incredibly important for Catholic apologetics. And, of course, we don't appeal to the early church fathers because they are popular. We don't appeal to the early church fathers because we're necessarily appealing to their natural genius, like one would with appeal to authority. Remember, the early church fathers are, if you will, historical data, eyewitnesses, pointers to the original faith that was handed down by Christ and his apostles. And so we're going to talk about St. Basil the Great. So we got a great father in store for us today. But lest I forget, I want to give my shout-outs to all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube and all the other social media outlets. Thank you. And turning my attention over here to the YouTube section of Dojo. Thank you. Wow, very colorful emojis today. Thank you. Appreciate it. And also want to welcome all of you on listening to radio around the country and also around the world via podcast. You can always access all the shows of Hands-On Apologetics and the other great programs Virgin Most Powerful produces at our flagship website, which is www.virginmostpowerfulradio.org. or through our handy-dandy phone app. So lots of great stuff, great resources as we continue to do our apologetics in place. And, thank you, everybody. I know the word has been spreading. We've been getting subscribers. People are tuning in, checking out our stuff. Really appreciate it. Please continue the great work. And, of course, if you're listening on radio, driving in a car, you can't like or subscribe, but you can when you get home. But, if you can, maybe do a quick sign of the cross. Keep us in your prayers, because prayers are so, so important for all those who explain and defend the faith. So, by the way, if you have any questions for Pat Flynn, you can give us a call toll-free at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. By the way, you can also email us at questions@handsonapologetics.com. That is the official Apologetics Dojo mailbox. I do answer the emails, and I always love hearing from all of you. So thank you for those who have emailed, and God willing, I will reply to you soon. By the way, if you haven't heard a reply from me, just send me a reminder email, because, the sensei is busy. Trust me, I'm actually getting ready for a pair of debates coming up early July. I got 3 manuscripts in the works. I've been busy, so it's possible that an email or two might sneak past me. So if you haven't received a reply and you have emailed me, please, just shoot me a quick email and say, hey, just a reminder, I haven't heard from you. All right, so let's jump into defining the fallacy for today. It's propaganda, and it's what I call defining opposition out of existence. I ran into this problem a while ago when I was discussing with a Baptist the idea of sacred tradition, this unwritten tradition that's authoritative in Christianity. And he threw down the gauntlet and said, show me in the Bible an unwritten tradition. Okay, if you could show me any unwritten traditions in Scripture, then I will believe it. And then the thought occurred to me, of course, that he's asking me to show me something in writing, something that is not in writing. Because when I did point out from the pages of New Testament where, unwritten tradition is used and referenced authoritatively, guess what? He's like, well, that's not unwritten tradition. It's in the Bible. So show me something in writing that's not written. Well, of course, that's impossible. And what he essentially did was defined opposition out of existence. And it's impossible to falsify that particular position given the parameters of the evidence that he's demanding. And this occurs not only with fundamentalist Baptists, it occurs all over the map, including with atheists. They will do the same thing. They will say, show me something supernatural in nature, and he'll point to a miracle, and they'll say, well, no, this is all natural. This is things that happen to physical stuff. I want you to show me something that's supernatural, beyond nature, in nature. So, of course, he can't. And essentially, they define out of existence any kind of supernaturalism. So keep that in mind, folks. It is out there. It's actually a lot more prevalent than I think most people realize. So that is our finding the fallacy, or the propaganda technique for today, the defining opposition out of existence. And let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father, who is a great early church father indeed. It is St. Basil the Great. The 3 great lights, which are so often referred to as the 3 Cappadocians, or the 3 Cappadocian Fathers, are, of course, Basil the Great of Caesarea, his friend Gregory of Nazianzus, and his brother Gregory of Nyssa. And Basil was born about the year 330 AD at Caesarea in Cappadocia to a most illustrious family. His father Basil was the son of St. Macrina the Elder, a zealous pupil of St. Gregory the Wonder Worker. His mother Emilina was the daughter of a martyr, and of the 10 children of the family, 3 became bishops. Basil himself made a bishop in Caesarea in 370, Gregory, bishop of Nyssa, and Peter, bishop of Sebaste. The oldest daughter, St. Macrina the Younger, was a model of ascetical life. So a very holy family indeed. As a student in Athens, Basil first met Gregory of Nazianzus, joining him in a friendship so close that at his eulogy to Basil in 381, Gregory would say that they were one soul with two bodies. Soon after his baptism, which was postponed until his adult years, Basil sought for a more perfect way of life, journeying throughout Egypt and the Middle East, inspecting the various ascetical and establishments. Finally, coming upon his home, he met Atheist of Shabashta, boy, say that 3 times, who seemed to Basil to have discovered already that which he's been searching for such a long time. The history of this friendship was rather like that of Jerome and Rufinus. If Basil's love lacked the gluttonous quantity of Jerome, when at last the friendship was dissolved in the aftermath of accusations and counter-accusations, was scarcely less venomous, scarcely less a scandal to the Christian life. So essentially they became great friends, and then they became the most bitter of enemies. The history of Basil's conflict with Arianism in all its forms also includes controversies over the Holy Spirit, which basically is synonymous with the Trinitarian dogma in the second half of the 4th century. He saw Arianism reach its ultimate and disastrous logical conclusion with the eunomian antinomianism, which basically said that Christ's natures, Jesus was not God at all. But anyway, I hear the music coming up. Coming up on the other side of the break, we have Pat Flynn. We're going to be talking about book reviews. Stay tuned, folks.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. Well, often there are apologetic books out there that you think are just rock solid. How can anybody not be persuaded by them? But, once you hand it over to your friends, they often have different opinions. And that's true not only for Catholic, Protestant apologetics, Christian apologetics. It's especially true probably for theistic apologetics. So how do you know what's a good book to give to a non-believer about the existence of God? Well, to help us answer that question, we have master apologist Pat Flynn, our good friend. Of course, Pat Flynn is the host of the Pat Flynn Show, which covers everything from fitness to mental health to business to writing philosophy and theology. He's a best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach, musician, entrepreneur, and he expounds upon his theory of generalism, a theory applicable to each and every one of us. And you can check out all the great stuff Pat does at his flagship website, which is chroniclesofstrength.com. And Pat Flynn, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Gary, it is always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, you're welcome. Boy, I almost made you into a magician. Sorry about that.
I got pretty excited at that one. But yeah, unfortunately, I can maybe do one or two card tricks, but that's about as far as it goes.
Hey, there we go. For me, it's like I can make my thumb appear to detach from my body. That's about as far as I go for my magical abilities. Mm-hmm. So, Pat, I've been looking forward to this show actually for quite a while because we had the great fortune of meeting up together for dinner, and we were chatting about, books that you've read back when you were an atheist, and you had some really good insights as to their strengths and weaknesses. And I've been waiting to do this on air, so I'm pinching myself that we're actually able to do this so other people can hear. So if you could just really quick kind of describe where you were. I mean, if you were a studied atheist at one point in your life.
Yeah, so I'll give the condensed account. I know I've shared it here before, but yeah. I was baptized Catholic, but I fell away from the faith at a fairly early age. I encountered that apparent or alleged conflict between science and religion. I remember very vividly in the 6th grade, my teacher expounding upon the origins of the universe, the Big Bang Theory, and thinking, very aloud, at least to myself anyways, in my head, that this is not what I learned in Sunday school. What's going on here? And that was sort of the first seedings of doubt, if you will. And, nobody declares themselves an atheist on the spot. I certainly didn't. But it inclined me towards a certain skepticism that would develop over time. So by the time I'm in high school, I'm at that point, through other various influences of mine, like Mark Twain and other writers, I eventually got my way to some of the old atheists and existentialists like Nietzsche. And that really opened me up to the world of philosophy. That really got me interested in philosophy, and for me, made it something I wanted to study, in a very serious way. So at that point, they really began to color my worldview in a naturalistic way. And over time, what ironically caused me to abandon atheism wasn't encountering any good apologetic books. That came much later. It came to a realization that naturalism, which is kind of the strongest form of atheism, was just wholly inadequate in terms of explanatory power or depth. It just increasingly, the deeper I went into it, appeared just really too absurd, too fanciful, too ridiculous to take seriously anymore. So that collapsed for me, and that at least opened me up to wanting to revisit thinkers and schools of philosophy that I had not, taken very seriously. I was familiar with them, Plato, Aristotle, but I didn't have any real studied depth in them. And so I went back and I said, all right, I'm gonna try and figure this whole reality thing out. And I went back to the classical thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, kind of started working my way up, not reading primary texts as much as I could, but, oftentimes it's helpful to have the secondary texts and the commentators and stuff like that. And, long story short, once I got to the Thomistic tradition, that was kind of it for me. And as I've said many times, I really became something of a Thomist before I became Catholic. So in a very strong and real way, it was St. Thomas who ultimately brought me into the Catholic faith. So, and then of course, once I'm, in that whole process, and even after that process, I did start reading more, I guess, of the mainstream apologetic books, of which I have varying opinions, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to because, like I said at the introduction of the show, we often bring whole sets of presuppositions. And so when we look at arguments, like, for example, if a God believer reads a book defending theism, it might seem like, wow, this argument is ripped and, how could anybody possibly find fault with it? But then you hand it to your friend and they kind of roll their eyes because they just don't share those same presuppositions that we do.
Right. Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind, I know we're going to talk about Geisler's book, How to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, is that a lot of people who are skeptics or atheists have very strong presuppositions and inclinations that may not and often aren't very well supported. But that bias will be so strong that if you come in from the wrong angle, they may immediately dismiss what they're about to read. So, for example, for a long time, any time that I heard anything that was kind of challenging evolution or promoting intelligent design or whatever, immediately raised a sort of red flag for me because I was kind of brought up in an environment where that was just equivalent to pseudoscience and trying to smuggle in creationism and all that sort of thing. So looking back, I try to keep that in mind, and not because I was right, by the way, not because I was right at all, but that was just kind of my inclination. That was my tendency. That was my bias at the time. And we all have biases. We must keep this in mind, right? Now, they might be correct or they might be incorrect, but we all have our particular bias. So I think part of the apologetic project is trying to make sure you use the right tool for the right job or the right person. And for some people, one book might come from an appropriate angle, and another book, which might have great argumentation, might never get a fair hearing just because of where that person is coming from.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, and so, talk about you can't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes even the titles of books can even color somebody, make them more prejudicial to the arguments than other books.
Yeah, 100%. So, just the idea of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist is coming out with a very provocative title. And immediately anybody who identifies themselves as an atheist is going to have some posture of defensiveness to that, right, inherently. Yeah. But, see, for me, even though I kind of, abandoned metaphysical naturalism, kind of going through the classical schools of thought and being, going deeper into people like Plato and Aristotle, this sort of big tent perennial philosophy that's sort of opposite of naturalism in so many ways. It's anti-reductionistic, it's holistic, it's anti-materialistic, it's anti-nominalistic. There was no, what's the word I'm looking for? There were no real barriers that I had to overcome because it wasn't really talking about atheism directly, but it was shifting and altering, and I would argue correcting my worldview in a more subtle way that eventually caused me to be open and receptive and even maybe biased towards some of the more provocative books in favor of theism, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, since we brought it up, why don't we start there with Dr. Norm Geisler's work, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. What exactly is his approach in that book?
Yeah, so I have it in my hand. I know we're not doing video today for technical reasons, otherwise we could do a little show and tell. But, this is, it's... For some people, this will be I think a good recommendation because if nothing else, he has a nice outline of a cumulative case for Christianity. So its structure, I think, is very elegant and appealing from a certain perspective. So, he begins by arguing that truth is mind independent and something that can be known, right? So he's kind of, and I think that's useful for everybody. Because we face this sort of barrier of relativism. So he starts there, that truth is something that can be known. Then he makes the case for God's existence, and he gives, some of the general, I would say, more popular level arguments for God's existence. I think if I remember rightly, he's got the Kalam argument in there. He's got some version of a teleological argument in there. And I would say the strengths of this book would be its accessibility. Its cons would be its lack of depth. Which is often a trade-off when it comes to apologetic works. so after he gets God's existence there on the table, he then, opens up for the possibility of miracles. So he argues for the possibility of miracles. And then from arguing from the possibility of miracles, he argues to the occurrence of miracles. And that's where he takes a shift to the historical evidence for the reliability of the Gospels and the resurrection. And then once he gets to the, historical veracity of the resurrection and establishing that Jesus is God, this is the part, obviously, I do not like about this book, and that I think is clearly wrong. He then tries to make a leap, really, to sola scriptura by arguing that Jesus promised us the Bible as inerrant. So I think that's one step in the argument that every Catholic would have to object to. But kind of bracketing that off, I think the structure is very elegant, and up front it gives a very nice, clear step-by-step path that somebody could take from reason, philosophy, and historical evidence to the truths of Christianity. So I think that's probably the strongest point of that book.
Yeah, my impression with Geisler, I love he's a very structured writer. It's almost like bullet points, which I really appreciate, just because it's so well organized and you just have to glance at it and you know where he's going. But yeah, when it comes to in-depth discussions, I find that he kind of is a little wanting there.
I agree, and I have to say fairly, if this was the first book that somebody handed me when I was a skeptic, I do not think this would have had a major impact on me. I think that there's enough lack of depth here, especially for somebody who does have some, philosophical training, that and let me be very clear here that in my review, I'm not claiming to have the definitive or final answer to any of this. This is just sort of from my perspective and the journey that I made. Who would this book be decent for? I think it would be decent not for atheists but for theists who might just be questioning or curious. Is there any evidence for God, or is there any evidence for Jesus? I think this gives kind of a nice general overview that can often, lend further confidence to the faith that people have by just showing them, oh, hey, actually, no, there is a very plausible case that can be made here. But if I were to give one book to an atheist, especially a sort of philosophically inclined or even trained atheist, this would almost certainly not be it.
Oh yeah, okay, very good. Yeah, that's good to know.
Sorry, and all due respect to Norman Geisler, he passed away a few years ago, but I think this book is better suited for the believer rather than the non-believer.
Yeah, very good. And with the title too, you would expect it to be more presuppositional apologetics, where he's critiquing atheism rather than putting a positive case. So that's also a little bit, I think, of a misnomer. But anyway, I hear the music coming up. We're chatting with Pat Flynn, the Pat Flynn Show, and we are critiquing theistic books. Which one should you hand to non-believers? Which one should you hand to believers who are doubting? Stay tuned, folks. More to come.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, A portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio, and it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. And we're doing book reviews, and helping us through this is former atheist, now Catholic, Pat Flynn. And we just finished talking about the late Norm Geisler's book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And, well, why don't we move to more of a Catholic camp in theistic apologetics, and a couple of books by Ed Feser.
Right, yeah. So where to begin? I have in my hand, I have The Last Superstition and 5 Proofs. I also have a number. Oh, don't let me forget, Gary, if we have a little time at the end, I did grab a bunch of books off my shelf that maybe we could do a rapid-fire book recommendation list as well.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Okay.
So, yeah, yep, go ahead.
Oh, just why don't we start with The Last Superstition, because that's his older book.
Yeah, so The Last Superstition, subtitle, A Refutation of the New Atheism, I think is a very good book. Interestingly, it's a polemic book, so it's a feisty read, and Feser comes out swinging for the new atheists. Now, for me, even though I was coming from a skeptical perspective, I did not read this book, early on. I read it later. But I would like to think that I probably wouldn't have had much of a problem with this book, because I always saw the new atheists as being somewhat dim-witted. I never took their theological or philosophical musings seriously, because how could you? So in that sense, I think you would want to be a little bit hesitant about who you recommend this book to, because if somebody's sacred cow is a Richard Dawkins and they see, that the goring of him throughout this book, they're gonna be on the defensive pretty quick. At the same time, I think all the criticisms that Feser makes of people like Dawkins and Harris and Dennett and Hitchens are spot on. They're completely on the mark. And the value of this book, and this is something I go back and forth on, and I know Feser has defended this himself, is the value of polemics, is that, so often religious people are just beaten down polemically and rhetorically, that I think Feser would want to give the case that, we can stand up for ourselves. It's okay to throw some counter punches every now and then. Of course, always trying to remain in the spirit of charity. So this is a kind of a different work from Feser, because it not only features a lot of philosophical argumentation, but, he's throwing some zingers in there as well. So in that sense, I think this book would certainly be more interesting to lay leaders, because, polemics just make for a more interesting read. And he does sort of build the classic Aristotelian Thomistic case for God, God's existence, attributes, and ethics as well. So he gets into sexual ethics, and that could be really helpful for people who are trying to understand, why does the Catholic teach this about sexual morality or contraception? And Feser will at least lay some of that groundwork in this book, The Last Superstition. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the strongest points of the book, in that it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? In the sense that the polemics may draw people in. It might help get them through more of the dense, philosophical argumentation. On the other side, it could be a turnoff for many people, and they might say that this seems just as uncharitable in some ways as some of the new atheists, even though I would argue it's far more rigorously argued.
Yeah, very good. What would be the negatives for the book?
I think the polemics would be, for a lot of people, negatives. I know that Feser's gotten some pushback on that maybe he pushed it a little too far in that regard. And he's written some blog post response kind of defending that. But as far as, and Gary, I'd love to have your thoughts on this too, if you've read this book.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I like this book. I thought it was a nice, popular level introduction. And I have recommended this to people. So I have a little bit of field testing on some of these books where I have recommended these books. And for the people that I have recommended this book to, they seem to have consistently gotten through it and consistently enjoyed it. And that includes people who were, and at least one person who still is agnostic, but is now somewhat leaning and curious. So it seems to have had made a positive impact in some way.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the last superstition, I agree with you. It's entertaining with the polemics. He makes great points. I think the only negative for me, and this is, coming from my background, is Phaser kind of says, well, to understand why New Atheism is totally false, you have to understand Aristotle. And then basically the book is an instruction manual on Aristotle's causes, right? Which is great if you had no exposure to it and and you're willing to wade through it. For me, it was a little tedious because it was kind of a lot of review material as far as Aristotelian causality, that type of stuff. But it was a good refresher. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it's a little bit of a waiting for me. Wading through.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the, again, it could be a pro or a con because Phaser, like me, is a committed card-carrying Thomist. So what he's going to do, what he's going to be able to provide, which Geisler doesn't, which interestingly enough, Geisler was a Thomist as well. He was a Protestant Thomist. So they would agree on a lot of the general metaphysics, but Geisler kind of takes more of a direct topical approach. Okay, here's some direct isolated arguments for God, whereas Phaser is taking more of a foundational approach. Let's get the metaphysics right. Let's get the structure of reality right, and then we'll see that just entails God. And so I think the latter approach is going to be more tedious and more difficult for people to get through, but I think it's going to give you a more robust and a more secure affirmation of God's existence and nature. But at the same time, people might not get through it. So that's kind of the balancing act you have to figure out as an apologist is, okay, which one of these approaches is going to be better for whoever I might lend a book to?
Yeah, very good. Well, that also leads us up to his newer book, not his latest book, but his newer book, 5 Proofs for the Existence of God. What's your impressions of that?
Yeah, I love this book. If I were to teach a master's course in natural theology, this would be required reading. I think it's the same thing that we just said, that he's establishing an interlocking Thomistic system here, where he gets to God's existence through different sort of, starting points, right? So we have the argument from change in here. We have the argument from composition, the argument from the principle of sufficient reason, the argument from, which ones am I forgetting? Augustine's argument from universals.
Yep.
And I think that's 5, right? Was that 5?
I think so.
It might have been 5.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's 5 of those, but anyway, they're all kind of knitted into the general Thomistic metaphysical system. So there's what I admire about this book is there's a unity there, right? It's not a collection of seemingly disparate arguments, and I think that's useful because I think it's just a good thing to try and get the metaphysical structure of reality right, and if we can use that to also get to God's existence and the God of classical theism, also fantastic. And he does a really nice job in this book of actually defending the project of natural theology as a whole and metaphysics, and he spends a lot of time on the divine attributes. So what's good about 5 Proofs is I think this is about as good of a book as I've read that can take some technical philosophical argumentation and make it at least mildly accessible for a popular audience. Now, I will say that I have given this book out. I tried to lead a study group of this book actually before quarantine hit. And, I had planned with the time we allotted to maybe get through 3 chapters, and we barely got through 1. So it was a slog for the lay audience. So I think that's the downside, is that even though I think this is about probably as good as it gets in terms of trying to bring this type of, metaphysical argumentation to a popular audience, I think for a lot of people they will probably find it to be tedious and a slog. So that would be my primary hesitation before recommending this one.
Yeah. So so what would you say if you have a non-believer who is kind of familiar with traditional theistic arguments? Would this be a recommend?
Yeah, I would, and as long, if I get a sense that they're sincere, they're interested, they really want to evaluate, I think this is one where, okay, maybe you haven't found the sort of arguments on YouTube convincing, for example, Kalam arguments, or just these sort of topical, I call them topical arguments, where they seem to be isolated or disconnected from any deeper metaphysical understanding. That's where I think you could put 5 proofs in somebody's hands and it might make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing, again, with the title, you think it's going to be Aquinas' 5 ways. And what I appreciated about his book was that he has this selection of very different arguments, like you said, from Plotinus and the arguments from sufficient reason, things like that. He comes at the argument from very different points of view. I mean, the same answer, different points of view. He anticipates arguments. And the one thing I really loved about this book was he was able to drill down on the historical origin of this really very common fallacy out there, that the primary premise for Aquinas is that everything has a cause. Therefore, of course, obviously God would have to have a cause because he'd be part of everything. But he actually drills down to find the source of it, which I think he deserves kudos for.
Yeah, because it's such a pet peeve of his, as it is for all of us, right? So, definitely thank you, Ed Fazer, for digging into that. But the other nice thing about this book is you'll get the treatment of popular kind of silly objections like that, but he really engages with what some of the strongest objections are as well, which is important. Yeah,
very good. Yeah, that's probably my favorite, is 5 proofs. If I was to give it to a non-believer,
I think I want to agree. I think I want to agree with that, because it's not polemic, but it's also well written. Fazer does have a good writing style as well, so I think we have to give him a strong acknowledgement for that. He has a very good skill of taking fairly abstract concepts and providing vivid illustrations. So I do feel pretty good about giving this book to most people, but I might give it to them alongside, another book or a series of lectures, just to kind of help them along with it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Fazer. So I think we got 2 strong thumbs up on Fazer's Last Superstition, 5 Proofs. Geisler's book, kind of in between, sort of good. Maybe for some people, not good for others. How about when we come up on the other side of the break, let's shift gears a little bit, and we could talk a little bit about Christianity, Christian apologetics. We could look at C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. How's that sound, Pat?
I've got it in my hand, Gary. It's all scribbled and on and torn up, and as many of these books are.
Yeah, I look forward to it because I have my that's one of those books that has some really great stuff for it, but there's some things it's like, well, I don't know, Lewis. It's Protestant perspective kind of comes through, and I don't think it's
I 100%
strong.
agree. Yep.
Okay, good. So, it'll be fun to tear that apart and give a good review. You listen to Hands On Apologetics. We are chatting with Pat Flynn and basically reviewing, apologetic works, theistic Christian apologetic works. Stay tuned.
Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Help the Helpless, a Minnesota St. Paul nonprofit organization chaired by Father of Tyr and volunteers, is humbly asking you for your kind support to help the poor and the handicapped children in India and Ecuador. Through financial support from the Help of the Helpless benefactors, the children are provided with clothing, food, education, shelter, and the teachings of the Catholic Church. The mission is to help children thrive and become self-sufficient young adults leading productive lives. We also provide aid to poor families in Ecuador with food baskets, medicines, medical assistance, and help with funeral needs for the deceased. The work in India is done by Father Antonio's organization, St. Mary's. In Ecuador, the work is being done by the Servant Sisters of the Home of Mother. You can call us at 877-762-8857. To learn more, please visit our website, www.helpthehelpless.org. God bless you. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com. Check out his website. He's got tons of great stuff on all sorts of different topics and issues. And Pat, like I mentioned before the break, why don't we jump to, I think this is a classic Christian apologetic work, C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Give us a little bit of an overview of the book.
Yeah, so Lewis is, well, first off, I'll mention this was a book that I did not read until after my conversion. And part of it was, quite frankly, I think a position of snobbery, because at that point I was, well, I've read through all the dense, scholarly work. What is this author of the Chronicles of Narnia possibly going to have to say, right? And
right.
That was definitely not right. That was definitely unfair, because Lewis is he is a popularizer, but he's a brilliant popularizer. He's got an incredible style and tone, and there's a reason that so many people have loved this book and have converted because of this book. So from a merely, I know sometimes we distinguish between the matter and manner of apologetics, matter understanding the content, the arguments, and the manner or the form, understanding how best to present them. I think Lewis is a masterclass in the manner. His style, his presentation is absolutely wonderful. It's warm, it's direct, it's concise, but it's inviting. And there's something to be learned from that. There's something to be imitated in that regard from C.S. Lewis. So yeah, Mere Christianity is something that every Catholic should reject, right? because it is, as you said, begging the question against Catholicism, because it assumes that certain central aspects of the Catholic faith are somehow secondary, and Catholics reject that completely. The sacraments are not secondary. The church is not secondary. So I would say the project as a whole, trying to reduce Christianity to these, sort of kind of like minimal commitments of, say, the incarnation and the atonement, from a Catholic perspective, is not enough, right? It's either wildly insufficient or it's just plain wrong. So I think once Catholics are clear on that, then you can try and make a prudential judgment of whether this would be a good introductory book to begin somebody in the process of spiritual seeking. And there, I think often, yes, it can be. And I know this is the case because I've had a number of people who've reached out to me online, especially, where I've just made the call that I think C.S. Lewis would be a good start for them, because it's hugely accessible. It's easily the most accessible of any of the books we've talked about so far. Yeah. But it's very enticing. Virtually everybody that I've given this book to, so far as I can tell, has finished it and really enjoyed it, and a number of them have become Catholic because of it. So even though we would say it gets some things just wrong, or it's Protestant leaning, it does seem to be quite effective for causing people to become Catholic, which is kind of the ironic thing. So that's my general overview, but why don't we jam on some of the details maybe? Okay,
yeah. For me, like you said, of course, it's very accessible, but he does like what I call big picture apologetics, where you just invite somebody to look at the landscape of Christianity from the Christian perspective. Even if you don't agree with it, at least you understand the concepts and ideas at work in it. And then I've often found that, just looking at the big picture, the sheer attractiveness of that big picture kind of draws people into really considering whether it's true. I think he hits the nail on the head as far as that. But
Yeah.
in terms of if you're looking for a real substantive, nitty-gritty, proofs and demonstrations, that's not the place to go.
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. I mean, he just gives a passing glance to the atonement, for example, and that's a huge point of contention. And I think Protestant theories of the atonement are repugnant, to say the most charitable thing of them. And that's, that's a big issue. We need to, because tied into that are questions of justification and salvation. But I think you're right in the sense that he does a good job. And we talked about this on the previous conversation, where sometimes our first apologetic project is just to get people to see that Christianity is beautiful and that it's good. Because a lot of the hesitation people have is they've been indoctrinated to see either religion generally or Christianity specifically as this sort of oppressive, backwards, patriarchal, tyranny in many respects, is this sort of ugly blight on what otherwise would be a purely enlightened society. And Lewis so beautifully paints that big picture, what you said. And I think it's hard to read Christianity and not get the impression of beauty, not just from his style of writing, but the way that he approaches it and describes it as well. So I think that's probably the biggest benefit. I mean, his argumentation is okay. It's a little thin. He kind of famously presents the trilemma argument, the Lord, liar, lunatic, which people have turned into a quadlemma of legend and stuff like that. So you'll get a kind of like a general apologetic introduction, but I think the biggest benefit of this, again, is making it attractive and beautiful. And the biggest con would be, not a whole lot of depth and, kind of overlooking what some of the more critical issues are, including, the church, the sacraments, that there really is no mere Christianity when you get down to it.
Yeah. His presentation of the church as far as being many rooms and people are in the hallways and some people are in one room and another. And, that might be a way to soft sell the divisions within Protestantism, but it's not historic ecclesiology, doctrine of the church.
100%. I agree. Now, the other side of that is you read Lewis's other works, especially, his Abolition of Man, and you realize, wow, man, this guy was quite Catholic in many ways. Here he is defending essentially traditional natural law. I mean, he's calling it the Tao or whatever, but, certainly in kind of an interesting way, I think he serves as a bridge. Because he wasn't Catholic, a lot of Protestants read him, but then they become Catholic because of him. So he fits a kind of interesting and unique role in some respects.
Yeah, that's very well put too. Very well put. Well, you want to do the fast round of just going through titles and doing a few quick comments?
Yeah, so I just grabbed a bunch of books off my shelf that have either influenced me on my way into the faith, have helped me while I've been in it, or that I've helped other people that I've recommended it to. So these span a wide variety of experience level, beginner, intermediate, advanced. So why don't I just start rattling them off, and Gary, just stop me if you want any further comments on any of them.
Okay.
So I would say,
sounds good.
All right, where to start? A nice new book that's come out by a friend of mine, Dr. Josh Rasmussen, is called How Reason Can Lead to God. So if you want a accessible but still rigorous version of a kind of contemporary contingency argument, pick that one up. I'm happy to give my friend Josh a plug there. On a more technical side, one book that was really helpful for me is called The Principle of Sufficient Reason, a Reassessment by Alexander Pruss. Pruss he's a Catholic with 2 PhDs, one in math and one in philosophy. And this was big for me because if you can get the PSR, the Principle of Sufficient Reason, that every contingent thing that exists has a sufficient explanation for its existence, that pretty quickly connects you to God, right, and affirming God's existence. So this is a really good book of showing that the PSR is not just tenable, but actually true. So very important there. A little more technical, but I think it's worth reading. This is something I would hand to a more say philosophical atheist for sure. Another person who I think is a really something of a hidden gem, but whose work I love both on a popular level and some of his scholarly publications is Father Robert Spitzer. And he's got a wonderful book called New Proofs for the Existence of God, and he's got arguments from contemporary physics and philosophy in there. So he goes into the fine-tuning arguments, which I know we've talked about before, and sort of a kalam argument with some interesting additions that from philosophy that he adds that you don't see in other presentations that I think is helpful. And then he kind of gives contemporary versions of Thomistic proofs and incorporates some modern scientific discoveries to buffer some of the metaphysical premises as well. So I really like that book. That's I would say that's kind of intermediate level. A little bit more beginner would be his book, The Soul's Upward Yearning. This is really cool because you not only get the philosophical arguments and some of the scientific arguments, but you get some experiential arguments, and he goes pretty deep into the phenomena of near-death experience too, and arguing not just for God, but the transphysicality of the human soul, the immateriality of the human soul. So definitely that one. Yeah, I would say The Soul's Upward Yearning is a really nice addition. If you're super into natural theology and you want to go deep in that, get the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. That's edited by William Lane Craig, well-known Protestant philosopher, but it's got contributions from people like Alexander Pruss. So this will be a pretty dense and technical exploration of arguments for the existence of God, but there also is a pretty nice chapter in here from the McGrews, Tim and Lydia McGrew, defending miracles and the historical resurrection as well. So that would be more advanced. That would be more for people who are very philosophically inclined or, trained in that sense. Yeah. Let's see here. For general introductions to Thomistic metaphysics, I like Father Norris Clark's The One and the Many, a contemporary Thomistic metaphysics. I thought that was really well done. A nice contemporary introduction. Same with Phaser's Scholastic Metaphysics. That's a good one. I think those two will give you a nice, kind of easy enough introduction to that subject. Maybe add the book Real Essentialism by David Oderberg on top of that. Yeah. Let's see here. I'll do one more for metaphysics. An Elementary Christian Metaphysics by Joseph Owens. That's a good classic one to add in there as well. In terms of sort of the second pillar of apologetics for Jesus, there's a book by Brant Petrie that I found was a really nice kind of clear and quick case, The Case for Jesus by Brant Petrie. And I was impressed by that one, especially after reading longer ones like N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of God, which I also recommend. But I would not generally hand that one to just anybody. But Petrie's book, I think I would be comfortable handing that to people who are open to looking at the evidence. I think that strikes a nice balance. Now, for Catholic apologetics, I would also point right to Petrie. His series on both Jesus and the Jewish roots of the Eucharist and Jesus and the Jewish roots of Mary, I thought were just really well done. Again, a nice balance between conciseness and accessibility and, good argumentation as well. So those are great. There's another book here of, why Catholic Bibles are bigger. I think we know who the author of that one might be.
Throwing a shameless plug, huh? Well, I appreciate that.
It's deserved, of course. These historical works are really important. And I think I told you before that I had a friend who was doing a Bible study or not a Bible study, just a group study around that book. And you converted. You got people. You got converts signed up in RCIA. So it's field tested. That'll.
That's great. Well, Pat, I hear the music coming up. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Always enjoy it, Gary. Thank you.
All right. You can check out all the great stuff Pat has at chroniclesofstrength.com. Check it out, folks. chroniclesofstrength.com. And coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jessica Show. Hope everybody has a great weekend. God willing, we'll be back again Monday to do this thing we call Hands on Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.